Right now, you're wearing clothes. You've worn them every single day of your life. You've never once questioned why. The answer seems obvious. It gets cold. You need protection. End of story. But that's not the story. The real reason humans started wearing clothes has nothing to do with temperature. And when scientists finally figured it out, the answer came not from archaeology, not from ancient cave paintings, not from any human fossil at all. It came from lice.
Let's start with what we actually know. For most of human history, our ancestors were naked. Not just occasionally naked, permanently, completely. Never thought about it naked. Homo sapiens evolved in sub-Saharan Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. The average temperature there was between 77 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. You don't need clothes in that heat. You need to lose heat, and naked skin does that perfectly. Our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, have never worn a single thing in their entire evolutionary history. They don't need to, and for the vast majority of our existence, neither did we. So the cold theory always had a problem. Humans were naked in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone went anywhere cold. The question was never why did humans wear clothes in the Ice Age? The question is why did they start at all? And for a long time, nobody had a good answer.
Then, in 2003, a team of evolutionary geneticists did something nobody had thought to do before. They studied lice. Specifically, they studied the genetic difference between head lice and body lice. Because here's the thing most people don't know. These are two completely different subspecies. Head lice live in hair. Body lice live in clothing. They cannot survive without fabric to lay their eggs in. No clothes, no body lice. It's that simple. So the researchers asked a straightforward question. When did body lice first split off from head lice? When did that subspecies first appear? The answer, published in the journal Current Biology, was approximately 170,000 years ago. 170,000 years ago, somewhere in Africa, a human put something on their body. Not because of cold, not because of modesty, for a completely different reason entirely.
But before we get to that reason, we need to talk about what those first clothes actually were. Because they weren't clothes. Not really. Archaeologists have found the oldest known sewing needles in Siberia, dating back around 50,000 years. The oldest shell beads used for ornamentation go back 130,000 years in Morocco. Ochre, the red pigment humans use to paint their bodies, has been found in sites going back 300,000 years. What this tells us is that before humans ever put on a single piece of animal skin for warmth, they were already obsessed with covering, marking, and decorating their bodies, not for survival, for something else entirely. In 2010, anthropologist Francesco Dorico at the University of Bordeaux published a study that reframed the entire conversation. He argued that the first body coverings weren't about temperature regulation at all. They were about identity. In small hunter-gatherer bands, everyone knew everyone. You didn't need to signal who you were to people who had known you since birth. But as human groups began interacting with other groups, strangers, for the first time in history, you needed a way to communicate something instantly. Who are you? Where are you from? Are you a threat? A marked body answered those questions before a single word was spoken. Body paint, animal skins worn as cloaks, shells threaded into patterns, feathers tied into hair. These weren't decorations. They were a language. The first human language that didn't require sound.
But there's a second theory, and it might be even stranger. In 2021, researchers studying ancient shamanic practices across cultures on 6 different continents noticed something remarkable. In nearly every traditional society ever documented, across cultures that had no contact with each other, across thousands of years of separation, the act of putting on specific coverings was associated with one thing: transformation. When a shaman put on an animal skin, they weren't dressing up, they were becoming something else. The skin was a bridge between the human world and the spirit world. The clothing wasn't worn by the person disappeared inside it. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade spent decades documenting this pattern across Siberian, African, and Native American traditions. His conclusion was that the earliest human coverings were almost certainly ritual objects before they were practical ones. The first thing a human ever put on their body was probably not meant to keep them warm. It was meant to make them something other than human.
And then came the cold. Around 100,000 years ago, humans began migrating out of Africa, into the Middle East, into Central Asia, into environments where the temperature dropped below anything their naked bodies could survive. And they had something nobody who came before them had ever had. They already knew how to work with animal skins. They had been doing it for tens of thousands of years, not for warmth, for ritual, for identity, for transformation. The technology of clothing already existed by the time they needed it to survive, which means clothing didn't save the human species from the cold. Clothing was already there. The cold just gave it a new job.
Here's what nobody talks about. Every other animal on this planet that moved into cold climates evolved fur. It took hundreds of thousands of generations of natural selection to do it. A slow, grinding biological process that reshaped the animal from the inside out. Humans did it in a single generation. One person figured out how to skin an animal, scrape the hide, and wrap it around their body. And overnight, in evolutionary terms, our species could survive anywhere on Earth. We didn't adapt to the environment, we wore the adaptation. That's never happened before in the history of life on this planet. Not once. Every species either evolved to survive in a new climate or died trying. Humans just put something on and walked into the cold.
And here's the part that should unsettle you. The clothing you're wearing right now is the end of a 170,000-year chain of decisions that started not with survival, but with meaning. Someone looked at an animal skin and saw a way to become something else. Someone threaded a shell onto a cord and decided that their body was a message worth sending. Someone painted themselves red and walked into a gathering of strangers and said, without words, I am one of you. Or I am not. We think of clothing as practical, as obvious, as the most basic thing a civilized human does. But the first humans who ever covered their bodies weren't thinking about warmth. They were thinking about who they were. And 170,000 years later, so are you. Every single morning, without realizing it, you do exactly what the first clothed human did. You decide who you're going to be today, and then you get dressed.